Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is voiceover artist Laura Richcreek. Laura, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for doing this.
Sure.
I think you are the first voiceover artist I've ever met because I've worked with sort of secondhand through our creative team.
Okay.
I've worked with a lot of voiceover artists, and you and I have actually worked together on voiceover stuff. And you reminded me that we had, in fact, met in the real world, but it wasn't because we were working together on voiceover stuff.
Right.
It was something else. So I think it was Ivy Tech work that you did in partnership with Brad Bors, who's great, who does a lot of work with the agency. Do I have all that right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. I'm super intrigued by your story because, as I mentioned, I've worked with voiceover artists, and I've always wondered, how do you get into that and what does it actually involve? So I want to hear a lot about that. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you're working on because you don't just do commercial work, you do audiobooks, you do some other things. Want to hear about all those things. But take us back to the beginning, whatever that means for you. What was your original idea on what your career was going to be? And it may have been voiceover work, but it may not have been. And then when did you decide that what you're doing now is what you wanted to do?
Okay, wow. Well, I think I would say that I blame my parents for this. Okay. So it goes way back. And that's to say that's a positive thing because they are both educators and have a love of reading, and they cultivated that in me and my brother and me. And gosh, ever since I can remember, my dad was reading the Little House on the Prairie books to me. My mom and I would read together. I would read to her while she was preparing dinner. And so I became, I improved my reading skills, and I was good at it as a young reader. And then, as far as acting, because that's a part of voiceover work,
Yeah, sure.
That was in the children's choir at church. And so that's where that started. And then through high school and through college. And I wanted to be some sort of academician. I wanted to get a degree in English, and it became English education. And then journalism was tacked onto that. And then I taught some, but actually when I got out of college, I did construction. So
oh, really? Okay.
Didn't use
so
any.
how did you get into construction?
Actually, I went to college with a guy who had a small construction team and needed somebody else, and I was available. And so I was the only girl on the team, so it was novel and kind of cool. But then I did eventually start teaching on the college level, and found that I really wasn't enjoying teaching.
Were you teaching English?
Yes.
Okay.
And I enjoyed working with students and enjoyed helping them one-on-one, but I didn't like all the administrative stuff and all the massive grading that there is in that field.
You and I have that in common. I taught writing classes at the college level, and I loved being in front of students and working with students, and the pile of papers would just steal my soul every time I looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, there went your weekend every weekend
for
the semester.
For sure,
yeah. So I ended up getting out of that, and I got into technical writing, and really enjoyed that because of the precision that's needed in documenting processes and being able to convey that to somebody who should be able to theoretically walk up to a machine and, based on the process you've written, be able to operate the equipment. Yeah. So I really enjoyed it. And I got to work in a lot of different fields, the paper industry, the defense industry, the automotive industry. So it was all really enjoyable.
So were you traveling around the country doing that work, or were you based here in Northeast Indiana? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then I started having children. And so they kind of, took my time.
Yeah.
And I intended to be a stay-at-home mom. Once I had kids and found out how fun they are, I was all in.
Yeah.
And
how many kids, and how old are they now?
I have two. They're 18 and 15, and they are the coolest kids around.
Yeah.
So we have we're pretty tight.
All right, well, that's great.
They probably wouldn't say that, but at least not out. But and actually in there, some unplanned things happened. I got divorced, and so I moved, and then I couldn't be a stay-at-home mom anymore.
Sure.
But I happened to get acquainted with the Whitley County Habitat for Humanity affiliate and started working as a housing counselor for them, which, again, it was detailed work, very detail-oriented, putting files together, and then also helping people on a one-to-one basis people that are in crisis. And that there was a lot of gratification from that.
Oh, sure.
But then the program that I was working on ran out of money. And so I voluntarily was let go. And I mean, we were talking about it, and you do what's best for the organization. And my neighbor across the street, I don't know if you might know him, John Burkett with Red Tide Productions.
Yeah,
he's
know the name.
Brad's actual brother-in-law, actually.
Oh, okay.
And this is where it's kind of unusual, but it was at this point, it was my dog who got me into it. And
Okay.
I had an amazing black lab named Atticus, and he was beautiful and very well behaved. Knew certain commands, and so John wanted to use him in a commercial, and so he and I went over there, and because it was right across the street. Then after shooting, we were talking, and I said, I've always wanted to get into voiceover, so if you ever need somebody, let me know. I'm unemployed right now, and he used me on about 6 commercials, and then. Actually, I'd like to back up because this is probably 2012.
Okay.
And then back in, I think, 2010, I had taken a class in the continuing ed department over at IPFW from Craig Allen, and he talked about how to get into voiceover.
Okay.
And so, what's neat is that Craig also did my demo way back then.
Yeah.
But then when I was all the stars aligned and I was actually going to be able to get into voiceover, that's the demo I used to get started. And just recently, he redid my demo.
And that demo is actually on your LinkedIn page, if I'm not mistaken.
I hope it's the new one.
It references 2010, I think.
Oh, dear.
I was snooping on your LinkedIn page today. So
well, I think I posted my new demo, but it sounds like I need to go back and do an update.
And maybe by the time this gets out in the world, you'll have the chance to get it right.
I'm going to work on that tonight.
Yeah. Now I want to listen to it. So this is 2010-ish, you said?
That's when I first had the opportunity to feel like this is something I could do.
Okay.
And because I wanted to read audiobooks way back when I was little.
Sure.
And because I thought it was so neat, because in our family, not only did we read to each other, but my mom especially just consumed audiobooks. And so I would hear those, and I would participate as a listener in those.
Sure.
So then jumping forward again, I bought my first mic, and I think I bought a mud guard, and I downloaded Audacity and did the best I could.
Yeah.
And that's not a lot. I would get so frustrated because I had to edit out so many noises and just, a sigh over here or a train over there. And sometimes you can't edit all that out. So I have to redo. But then I was in a couple of programs, community programs where there were opportunities for grants. And I won a grant and was able to outfit my office. Oh, wow. With it's totally acoustically treated, and I have these heavy curtains over the window. And so when I shut the door, it's a sound. It's not soundproof, but it's a sound booth.
Wow. So has it always been a home-based business for you?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Because my experience, and I would get on my depth pretty quickly, is that when I started working at Asher, I really had no exposure to the world of voiceover artists prior. But this is like 2004, and it was always you had to go to a studio to do it. But it sounds like you were kind of ahead of the curve with having that studio in your home. Was that a function of being, a single mom, or were there other factors?
It was out of necessity, and then the desire to still get back to being a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And but I think also at that time, with software like Audacity, and then the fact that mics were becoming so much more affordable. I mean, my first one was, I think, $100. Yeah. It was a Blue Yeti. And so I think because it's become affordable, and then I don't know if other communities have this resource, but Sweetwater has just been a wonderful resource.
Yeah, sure.
Their whole approach to how they work with customers makes all the difference. And so when I went in there, I didn't know anything. And the gentleman that I got attached to ended up, he understood I had a very limited budget and was just getting started. And so he pointed me in the right direction and really tried to save money for me and help me out in that way. And that endears you to
sure.
them or endears them to you. And so,
Sure.
but I think it's become more and more that way.
Sure. Sure.
Where people can have their home studios and it works.
Yeah.
You don't have to hire it out.
So when do you go from my neighbor happens to do this, I'm going to do a few spots here and there, to this is what I'm going to do, this is going to be my career? How quickly does that happen?
Man. Oh, wow. I can't remember just how it worked. I talked to a couple of people that I knew could give some business advice, and they directed me towards a website, doing a website and getting some business cards, having a logo to kind of give that presence to it. And then I was doing research and learning about where to find voiceover work. And that could have been a matter of months. I was on unemployment, so I had some income, so that there was some urgency, but I also had a little breathing space.
Sure.
I don't know if I can answer that
Yeah,
definitively.
that's okay.
But
So let me ask you this. There's multiple ways that work can find you. It can be through agencies. It can be through audio houses directly. It can be through clients directly. But today it's like there's more opportunity, but it's more competitive at the same time. What's that like for you? Are you, there are times when, again, through another party here, we'll just source a voice from the internet, someone who, is probably 100 or 1,000 miles away. And there are times we use people locally. What does that ratio look like to you? You doing a lot of work mainly with local entities, or is it all over the place and you kind of don't know how it finds you?
Well, I would say the commercial work has been more local, and it's been word of mouth, or they told me that they literally just searched for local voiceovers and found me.
Okay.
The audiobooks, because I go to a hub and which reaches out to, internationally, that's been, I had a client in Hawaii, a client in Connecticut, one in Iowa. So that's neat to be able to talk to people from different parts of the country. But and just recently I'm running an experiment with my business, and I tried some of those other hub kind of places for commercial work at Fiverr and Upwork. We're in the experimental stages.
Yeah.
Haven't gotten real far, and I'm learning and trying to make sure I'm working them to the best that I can. I'm not sure I'm there yet.
Sure.
But
sure. So from a marketing standpoint, you talk about some of the ways you position yourself. In terms of your brand, do you describe like your voice quality or the type of work you do in a certain way? I know there's times when, we even talk about it here, like we'll say we're looking for someone who has this quality. I don't even think we know what we're talking about, but we kind of know. How do you describe what is an audio brand? How do you describe the work that you do and describe your voice qualities, if you will?
Well, that's a good question. I have a line that I think is on some of my social media, it might even be on my LinkedIn, that it says something like sophisticated like Cabernet and smooth like butter. But I don't know, it might say something else. And trying to show my versatility.
Yeah.
So that I can do the smooth and soothing voices and maybe even a little sultry. But then I can also do, this rough and ready cowboy type male voice. And
really?
And I've done it. And
I kind of want to ask you to do it, but I won't ask you to do it unless you want to do it.
I could. It's just a little out of context. But gosh, I don't know. I think there are ways that you describe it. You talk about your general accent and maybe a couple of other accents you can do. The tone that you might have, if you tend to have a low tone or a higher tone. So I'm trying to think of what I've done. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because it's kind of like trying to describe verbally a color, describing a sound, and how you position yourself from a marketing standpoint. Because I'm sure there's people out there who want the type of voice you have, but I'm curious as to how they describe it or how you would know it's a good fit.
Yeah, I mean, some other words I can think of are edgy or mellow or, but so often, if you go to a voiceover's website, they have their demos right there, so you don't just read edgy. You can immediately
Sure.
hear a
Sure.
5-second clip
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've got a decent amount of range then.
I aim for that.
Yeah, yeah. So how does that translate to the audiobook world? Because when you're doing a 30 or 60-second spot, you can act like a cowboy for 60 seconds. And I assume that's a lot easier than acting like a cowboy for 600 pages.
Yeah.
And how much acting is involved, if any, in the audiobook world?
A lot. I mean, I have stood up to, in front of my mic. I've rearranged the room and stood up in order to partly act out the scene. Recently, it seems like a character of mine was pointing a gun at somebody, and so I was, gesturing like that so that I could really get the feel for it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
Well, we're talking about the acting aspect
Okay.
and a couple related questions. This is fascinating to me because my guess is sometimes you're doing it. Are you doing it on your own most of the time? Or are you getting direction as you're doing it in any cases?
Typically on my own. There might be, there's conversation with the author.
Yeah.
Excuse me, prior to that. And they might give me free reign.
Mm-hmm.
And every author's different. I've had some that are very involved, down to this line. I'd really like you to tweak it in this way. And then others who love everything I do, and it's almost a little too loose.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I just try to do my best and give it my best interpretation, and always offer that if they don't like it, let me know. We'll change it. We'll work on it.
Have you done anything in another language, or is it all English?
I think I've had to do some short phrases in Latin. There was a paranormal romance where somebody in it was casting spells, and those were in Latin. There might have been a phrase here and there in French or Spanish or something
English.
like that. Yeah, primarily English. I mean, that's my native language, and I really can't say that I can speak another language fully. So
And when it comes to audiobooks, do you read the book first, or are you reading it as you're reciting it?
No, you have to read it first.
Yeah.
And I take lots of notes
Okay.
and look words up to make sure that I know what it is so that I can envision the scene. I apologize. And make sure I can pronounce words correctly. If I see an error, or if I don't understand why this action is taking place, I study that to make sure I've got it down. And then if there are accents that I don't want to be surprised by any accents throughout. And there have been times when I have, maybe I didn't read closely enough. And so then I have to either do some re-recording or stop and study it and then get back to the recording and do it right. And then I make a lot of notations. This is when, if I have a paper copy, I make a lot of notations. Even I'll put a smiley face just so I know for this line I need to smile.
Yeah. So does it change the way you read for pleasure? Because does it, there's one of the things I found is we talked about, you having been in the English world and in academia, and I kind of lost my love of reading for a while because it felt like work. Does it feel like work when you're reading books now, or are you able to separate that?
Well, no, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
But I do read differently. In fact, because I keep Post-it notes and a pencil or pen with my workbooks, and I find that I do that with any other book that I'm reading, and sometimes it has to be really gripping, like maybe a Stephen King for me not to be looking stuff up on the side.
Okay.
But I still enjoy all of it.
Yeah. Okay. So how long does it take? I know it's based on the length of the book, but approximately from the time you get an assignment until a standard length novel, if you will, is done, how long of an engagement is that?
Well, it's almost a little easier because I think my situation is different because I'm a stay-at-home mom.
Yep.
and single mom. And then I have, and my kids are now in online school. So they're right there all day. And they're great about being quiet when I need them to be. Nonetheless, it's natural to have much more interruptions. I don't have that 7-hour block where I'm alone. So it probably takes me longer than it does maybe the average audiobook producer, somebody who has a little bit better situation or a little different situation at least. But the calculations or the ratio is that 1 hour, one finished hour of an audiobook takes about 6.2 hours to create.
Wow.
Because there's that initial reading, recording, editing, re-recording, fixing corrections, and then, or making corrections, and then mastering. And then you want to do proof listening where you go line by line. And that's not always, it's not a good idea to have that be you because you're already too close to the material. And then you have quality check. And then it goes to the rights holder, and then they're going to have their own, they have to approve it. And whether they listen to the whole thing or not, you don't know. But it's good if they do because they might catch stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a very long process, and that needs to be explained up front. And then the editing process is probably the most labor intensive because you have to edit out breaths, but then there's some breaths you want to leave in so that your dialogue is natural sounding. Remove any clicks, noises, mic bumps. And so it's very arduous.
Yeah.
But I enjoy that.
Well, and I would suspect that the average person, and that includes me, would think it's a lot easier than it really is. Like, well, I have a voice, I could do this. I'm sure you hear that all the time. What's your response to that?
Well, actually, you don't have to have a great voice, and sometimes unique and kind of off-sounding voices are good, but because they draw the attention.
Sure.
It depends on how deeply we get into the conversation, but how much I can actually say. I think they'll usually ask, do you think I could do that? And so they want an evaluation of the sound of their voice.
Yeah.
And then that's where I say, an unusual voice is actually really good. But this is what I would encourage you to do. And then let them go do the homework.
Yeah.
And then if they're serious, then we can have more conversation about it.
Sure. Sure.
Because I also have things to do.
Sure. Yeah, you can't train your competition. What are some of the voices that, if any, and you can say none, it's not something you consider, but are there any voice actors or just actors in general whose voices you find compelling that speak to you? Any examples?
Yes, absolutely. My idol is Frank Muller.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm not.
Okay. He did, oh my gosh, he's had such a breadth of work. He started out as a stage actor and I think did some film and TV. And then where I was introduced to him was listening to his audiobooks. And he and Stephen King had a really close relationship. Okay. And what's cool is that he was in a really bad accident and then died several years later. And his widow, Erica, friend requested me on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
I nearly cried. Because this was my idol's wife, and I just was stunned. And she and I have the same sense of humor, and we've messaged back and forth.
So did she find you because you had referenced her spouse?
I actually put a picture of Frank and Stephen King and her on, I don't know why, I don't know what the post was. It was just a picture that I found, in the Googleverse and had it on there, and somebody tagged her and then she and I connected. Oh, wow. It was the neatest thing.
That's great.
So Frank Muller is my idol. And then there's a gentleman by the name of R.C. Bray. And he's done a lot of audiobooks, and he's phenomenal. I mean, when he has a really gruff voice, but when he does a woman's voice, you believe it's a woman. As you're listening, it's seamless. He's just amazing. I think the gal's name is Julia Motica or something like that, but she's done Gigi Pandian's The Accidental Alchemist series, and she's very good, and her French accent is very good, and she can flow in and out of her American narration accent into that French accent just beautifully. She does a really good job. Those are probably my favorites right off the bat, but but I could. What's kind of funny is I could be sitting in a restaurant or in a public place
Yeah.
somewhere, and I'll just be. Who said that? I have to see what they look like because I'll hear a really neat voice, and I just want to hear more of it.
Yeah.
And so, voices are very fascinating to me, and I'll tune in to them easily.
Have you ever had an assignment sent your way? It could be a book. It could even be something commercially that just wasn't a good fit for you, and you had to turn it down, walk away, suggest someone else, ignore it altogether? And you don't have to speak to specifics. I'm just curious if that ever happens.
Yeah, it's happened a couple of times. One was a memoir, and the gal's niece wanted to be the narrator.
Oh.
And so I'd already done my audition and was getting started on, we'd already decided we were going to work together, and then she pulled the contract. She let me know, and I understood.
Sure.
I'm not going to.
Yeah.
That's okay. There's other work out there.
Sure.
There have been a couple where there just wasn't a connection with the rights holder. And so you just, as diplomatically as you can, just part ways or hasn't happened too often. And I always try to not burn bridges.
Sure.
Whether or not I'd ever work with them again, I just don't want to have that animosity, sort of animosity.
Well, and it sounds like it's somewhat like a lot of worlds. It's somewhat of a small world, and there's referrals and other things that could happen or not happen depending on how you handle the engagement.
Yeah, that could happen. And
Yeah. Well, I could keep peppering you with all these questions because I'm super curious about it. But in the interest of making good use of our listeners' time and your time, I want to pivot to the speed round of the show.
Okay.
So tell me about your career path, because it's a fascinating one, and you've done some things previously in your career, but you managed to build a pretty great thing on your own, through a little bit of luck, but a lot of hard work. What has that taught you about career success? What's your advice to people when it comes to being successful or fulfilled in their careers?
Well, I would borrow a couple pieces of advice from this Craig Allen, who in that class that I took back in 2010, he kept using the word persistence. And he said, you just have to be persistent. And along with that, as you're being persistent, you are learning and doing better and trying different things. But I've never forgotten that. And then the second piece would come from Maya Angelou, who wrote an essay about Miss Annie Johnson. And she was a Black woman who did not expect to be in a situation that she was. And she set off on a path, tried it, and then what she learned was that if that's not working, you set off on another path, and you don't feel shame, you don't apologize, you just do what's right for you, and you set off on that new path. And if that's not working, you set off on another path. And that's an essay I've shared with students in the past, and I just made a copy for each of my children and had them read it. And you can see the change when somebody gets to the end, how that frees them in a way.
Sure. That
they don't have to go down this prescribed path. They can branch off if it's better for them. And then what I would add to that is just from personal experience. And I've just lost it. Treating it like a business.
Yeah.
It's hard to do when you're home because you can hear the washer finish a load. Your kids are right there having questions.
Yeah.
And then, oh my gosh, when they're off for the summer, and I took time off and I just went swimming with them. And I played with them, and then I would try to do some work. You can't always do that, but you do. So you do need to treat it more like a business. And if you're going to take that time off, you need to then compensate for it.
Sure.
And then the other thing I try to do is I really try to reserve the weekends for myself and not even go in my office. Because by the time Monday rolls around, I'm excited to get back in the office. I almost can't wait because I have ideas. So
yeah, that's a lesson that it took me a long time to learn, but you got to get away from it in order to have some of your best ideas.
Right.
If you immerse yourself in the details, you're just going to stay too close to it to see the bigger picture. So
right.
I think that's great advice. All right, second question. What do you think are some of the myths or misconceptions about being a voiceover artist? Or you could take it the other way and talk about some things that are maybe underappreciated that are true that you don't think people know enough about.
Okay, well, I think I'll take the reverse. I think, this was true when I was a writer, and it is true as a voiceover, that people think it should be really easy to turn something around. And sometimes it is. If it's a phone message system, or, and you just have press 1 for, service department, that's pretty easy to turn around. But when you have an audiobook and you are trying to perform that audiobook, not just read it, that takes time. And to do a really good job and to get into it, you have to be able to breathe it. And people don't always understand that. The people I've worked with have, and I'm thankful for them.
Sure.
But back when I was a writer, if it took me 2 hours to write a procedure or longer, some people didn't even want to pay me for the time that it took me because they thought it should have been done.
Sure.
How hard is that?
Yeah.
You have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. Is there a tip, a trick, or a tool, something you use in your work? It could be outside of your work, but something that you rely on that's super important to you that you think people should know about. Could be a hack, could be any of those things.
Wow.
And it doesn't have to be an audio tool, even though you work in the audio world.
Okay. Well, trying to figure out if it's a good hack for everybody or if it's just a good hack for people who have ADHD, because that's a big challenge for myself. And I've had to learn what it is I need in order to make sure I'm getting everything done.
Sure.
And that I don't get distracted by cool research. And I feel like I said my advice when I said keep the weekends to yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm having a hard time coming up with a new one.
That's okay.
As soon as I leave, I'll think of it.
Sure. Sure. Well, let me ask you, I'll give you a related question.
Okay.
One of the things that I do a lot of public speaking, and I've heard multiple schools of thought on how to get ready, how to get your voice ready. My approach has always been just to start talking.
Okay.
Is there anything I or other people should do if they're in a speaking scenario to warm up the voice? Is there anything you do?
Oh, there are tons of techniques. I like tongue twisters.
Okay.
And sometimes the naughtier, the funner.
Yeah.
Just because, then you're laughing, then you're relaxing, and my mom's not in the room, so I can say it. But those are fun, and then there are just different exercises like lip fluttering and things like that, and then obviously staying hydrated.
Yeah.
So
is it room temperature water or cold water?
I prefer room temperature
Okay.
water. That's me, and then So I don't know if it works
Yeah.
for everybody, but yeah, I normally drink just room temperature water
Sure.
anyway.
Okay.
So
All right. So the other tip with the profane tongue twisters is make sure the lavalier mic is turned off if you are doing public speaking before you practice. Yes.
Right.
Because that's
shoot.
exactly what would happen to me.
Yeah. I'm always in the studio, so I always have a safeguard. Yeah.
Well, tomorrow I have a presentation at 8:30 in the morning, so maybe I'll try that right before I get started and see how it goes.
There are safe ones, suitable for work.
Oh, I may as well just go all in and try something unsafe. Well, Laura, thank you. This has been fascinating and super fun. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to actually see you face to face and not just hear your voice. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this week's episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.